If you're not spending, 30 to 40% of all of your income on your roof, then what can you achieve during this lifetime and what kind of impact can you make in your community or within your family or whatever is most important to you? I think tiny living as a concept and something that's really evolved in the public sphere on YouTube and HGTV really has been focused on the lifestyle decision of folks focusing more on experiences rather than things, perhaps. And so I am really viewing my background as kind of an opportunity to solve for the money problem of making that transition because there is not a smooth and paved path to tiny living life.
Welcome to Money Matters with Chris Hensley, where we spotlight financial literacy issues in the Houston community and beyond. And now your host, Chris Hensley.
Discussions in this show should not be construed as specific recommendations or investment advice. Always consult your investment professional before making important investment decisions. Securities offered through registered representatives of Cambridge Investment Research, a broker-dealer member FINRA SIPC. Advisory services through Cambridge Investment Research, Inc., a registered investment advisor. Cambridge and Houston First Financial Group are not affiliated. Welcome to a special episode where we're diving into the world of tiny living with financial expert Laura Lynch. Laura's journey from traditional homeownership to a tiny house is not just a tale of downsizing space, but upsizing life quality and financial freedom. Today, we'll explore how embracing minimalism doesn't mean compromising on aspirations and how financial planning plays a pivotal role in this lifestyle shift. Get ready to uncover the financial strategies and personal insights that make tiny living more than just a trend, but a pathway to a liberated and fulfilling life. Join us in this enlightening conversation with Laura Lynch, where tiny houses open doors to big opportunities. Laura, thank you so much for being on the show today, and welcome.
Hey, Christopher, that was a great intro. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm playing around with the intros here. It's a lot, but we're working on it here. And Laura, you invited me onto your show,
Uh-huh.
Less House, More Moolah, and that is, we recorded that yesterday.
Right.
And we've been, kind of talking a little bit here on the lead up to that in the last couple of weeks. So I've gotten to know you a little bit before we have our show today. But for listeners who aren't familiar with you, I'm going to take a second just to share your bio so that they can get to know you a little bit better. Laura Lynch is a financial planner and tiny house living advocate with a passion for helping individuals achieve financial freedom through alternative lifestyle. Her expertise in financial planning is specifically tailored to the unique needs of the tiny house community. Laura's personal journey in tiny living, combined with her professional background, allows her to offer specialized guidance in downsizing, debt management, and comprehensive financial planning. Her approach is rooted in her own expertise and driven by a desire to assist others in navigating the financial aspects of tiny house living. Your website, now you've got a couple. There's the Tiny House Advisor. That's where people can, if they want to get to know you a little bit better, they can go there. And then also the podcast that I just mentioned is Less House, More Moolah. Let's dive right into it. That was a lot, just with the intro, right? Let's dive right into it. What inspired you to transition from traditional homeownership to tiny house living?
Yeah, so this is so much rooted in sort of what happened with the pandemic. I was on the path, right? I was on the sort of big firm financial advisor path and was driving down I-95 headed south from visiting my family as the pandemic was breaking out. And, there was that moment of borders being closed and all of that uncertainty. And I said to my husband in that moment, why are we going back to a world where we have such a high cost of living, where we have a mortgage, where we have this conventional life that everybody expects to build for themselves? why are we not going to our tiny house, which is completely free and clear, where we would have a little bit more space, where maybe we could be more resilient in times of uncertainty? And so that is kind of the pivotal moment that launched the 20-month project plan of getting
Wow.
from our normal life to our tiny house full time. So we're 4 months out from the final moment of moving from a more traditional path to a tiny path. And really, it all kind of really began at that time of the pandemic and that trip south along the interstate.
Wow, 20 months, that's a long time. It's a big, huge project that you took on. I'm interested in, and of course, I'm interested as a financial advisor, but I think listeners will also be interested in how your background in financial planning influenced your approach to tiny living.
Yeah, so I think tiny living as a concept and something that's really evolved in the public sphere on YouTube and HGTV really has been focused on the lifestyle decision of folks focusing more on experiences rather than things, perhaps. And so I am really viewing my background as kind of an opportunity to solve for the money problem of making that transition, because there is not a smooth and paved path to tiny living like there is a smooth and paved path to home ownership. There aren't any government programs out there providing special loans for first time tiny house buyers or FHA loans or VA loans. There's still evolving legal landscape there that can be quite confusing. So I think that the financial planning background really aids me in helping people overcome the money problem when they're trying to make this change. And so also then I like to think that I'm sort of expanding the thought process outside of just lifestyle decision, but also to the additional financial autonomy that we can create by choosing this lifestyle, and also the potential for financial impact. If you're not spending, 30 to 40% of all of your income on your roof, then what can you achieve during this lifetime, and what kind of impact can you make in your community or within your family or whatever is most important to you? So I really view it as kind of a shift of values away from square footage over to maximizing life and impact. And so that's where I'm hoping that my financial planning expertise can help people sort of reshape their idea of tiny living from just lifestyle to those other financially tied elements.
I love it. I love it. And you said a lot right there. And I'm going to try to kind of just point out some of the things. One of the things you talked about was a value shift. You mentioned the roof. I know when I think of my clients and I think of things, expenses that people call in for distributions that are north of $10,000, roof, foundation work, air condition, those are the biggies, right? So, looking at it in that perspective of people, not having to come out 10 grand and north of that, and what could you do in your life with those big pockets of money there? You also mentioned, some of the roadblocks that this is not solving for that money plan is not as easy as just going out and purchasing a home through, say, FHA or VA loans. This is kind of new territory for some people, right? So having a guide like yourself, I can see where that is a huge thing for people that are going down this road. Let's pivot a little bit and talk, because we talked about some of the negatives here, but let's talk about some of the financial advantages of choosing a tiny house over a conventional home.
Yeah, so at the most basic, a tiny home is, roughly, depending on whether you're buying it, a new one, secondhand one, whether you're building it, right? Just in rough numbers, right? A tiny home is 1/3 of the price of the average home, 2023 average home purchase in the United States, $430,000, and you can get a pretty dang nice tiny house for 150,000. So just that opportunity to reduce the, drain on your income on, when I say roof, I mean kind of, the house, right? So
Right, right.
reduce the drain on your income of your cost of housing allows you to then perhaps create more financial autonomy for yourself, which, is choice, right? That's what we're all leaning into. Really, that's what retirement represents for most people is choice of what I'm going to do with my time, how I'm going to spend my energy, where I'm going to put my focus. And so for clients that choose to spend a lot less on their home, they're able to make more choices about what they do with their time. Maybe they take a sabbatical. Maybe they take a big family trip that they've always wanted to. Maybe they leave corporate and start their own business. Like there's just so many things that tiny living can enable just by reducing that, significant chunk of cost of living.
I love it. I love it. And some of those, I think everybody hears that. They hear that autonomy and the freedom of being able to, kind of get off of the corporate treadmill mill there for a little bit. But when we talk about hard dollar costs, the number that you threw out, that the housing, tiny house cost about a third of the average house, right? And
Mhm.
so that's huge. That's a really big difference there that you would be able to, fill in the blanks and put those dollars in different areas of your life. How do you advise when you have clients that come to you and they're looking at saving for a tiny house? How do you address budgeting with these clients?
Yeah, so this is a big part of the planning process is figuring out how you make that transition because very often you have to start work on achieving your tiny house before you can exit your other home. In my case, my tiny house was a DIY build and it was taking place years and years ago while I was paying a regular mortgage. So how do you sort of front those expenses, get yourself, set up before you make that leap? It's not the same as saying, hey, we're going to move across town. Let's get a realtor. Let's go shop for houses. Let's put in a contingent offer based on the sale of our current house or, whatever. Sometimes lenders understand, right, that you're going to buy and sell. In this case, you really have to be more strategic with your financing because the lending path is not so nicely paved. So with clients, I'm really looking for opportunities in their life during the process of downsizing to maybe capitalize on some of the things that are gonna exit their life due to their tiny life. So working with clients to think about where there might be money that they could pull from, different things that they might sell. Maybe there's, going to be a financial change in their life where their cost of living is going to be reduced by, stopping certain activities or a transition like retirement or, whatever. I'm trying to like really comb through their expenses and income to look for places where we can start to fund that buy or build project in advance of the transition. And you're totally right. It's absolutely about budgeting and understanding, fixed expenses versus flex expenses and where there is room to shift values around how we're using our money in order to achieve the dream that we have in front of us.
I love it. I love it. I am hearing some overlap with the type of clients that I work with who are retirees. So we don't necessarily call it downsizing, we call it right sizing, but the idea is the same, right? We're getting out of a bigger house that's costing us a lot of money. Maybe the kids have left and they're out of college and all of that. But those things are similar. Some of the things that are unique, though, if they wanted to move into a different house, there is a clear path to how you fund that, right? You've got some equity and you've got traditional loans. What's setting the tiny house apart is that it's not so clear cut for us, right? When it comes to the lending, and where you're working with people to get really unique ways of budgeting and getting that out to the forefront so that they can see that before they get into these builds that often take a long time, and a lot of planning goes into it. Could you discuss how tiny living can contribute to achieving financial independence?
Yeah, sure. So, like I said, the tiny home, just in rough numbers, right, is one third of the average, home purchase in the United States last year. So, if you have the same income or the same, dedicated amount of money that you would have used for a $430,000 mortgage, I've run the numbers on that, right? And it's about $2,800 in principal and interest a month at 7% interest. You can pay off a tiny home in 4 years for that same amount
Wow.
of money, even at a much higher interest rate on a personal loan or some of the other lending solutions that are out there for tiny homes. So if you can, kind of continue to push forward with income making in order to, have that same sort of pool of money to devote to a house, you can really get debt free so much faster. And so then once you become, completely mortgage free, then sort of the world is your oyster as far as how you might want to retool your life to align with your values, whether that's, more travel, more time, focused on, balance of, time outside or, whatever it is that's most important to you. You really just have a lot more choice once you get to that point where you're not even having to pay for a mortgage anymore. So that is where I see the financial independence sort of hack there, right? The cost of housing is a huge lever that we can pull in our lives. And of course, tiny living isn't for everybody. And there's certainly people out there who need and value a large home, and there's nothing wrong with that. But for people who are just doing it because it's the default and the assumed path, like I think it's worth considering, hey, there are some significant trade offs to having this, sort of American dream home. And one of them is kind of being stuck, kind of what I call the mortgage leash for 30 years. And you're kind of stuck in that payment process where you don't have a lot of flexibility about how you might want to pivot your career. In my case, I was in that, 30-year leash. I had bought another house in, 2018. I had years and years and years to go, right, on paying that off. And I wanted to start my own firm. And starting your own firm takes you back to, revenue $0. And so there was only one way that I could achieve that, and that was by saying, hey, let's get rid of the mortgage, let's reduce our cost of living, let's take the nest egg that we have, and let's use that in a way to start this business and have a runway to the path that I want to be on for the longer term.
I love it. I love it. I want to talk a little bit more about your journey, Laura, which you shared with us is 20 months. That's a long time, right? What surprises have bubbled up during this journey over the last 20 months or so? Things that you weren't expecting that you'd like to share with us.
So, why it's been 20 months for us is because we have a very complex transition. We are changing geographies. We're moving from Florida to New Mexico.
Wow.
I had, yep, I had to leave corporate and start my own firm. My husband, who's in construction, had to wrap up his business, resign from his part-time job, and is launching a new business out there. So we have to kind of ramp up all the legalities of that. Part of that construction business is a lot of heavy equipment and tools. So we are having to take 4 different trips across the country to move and tow all of the excavators and bobcats and tractors and things across the country. We had 3 different properties in Florida, so a lot of strategy around tax efficiencies of dealing with properties and all of that. So that's why our path is so complex. And so when I work with clients, they have a, sort of a range of complexities. There will be people that are just renting, right? And they just want to get a place of their own and they think a tiny house is a good solution for them. And so figuring out, how to fund that and deal with the rental a payment that they have at the time and maybe some debt or what have you. And then there'll be people that own a home that are trying to be more sustainable and downsize into a smaller package. And then there will be people like me who have like just a lot of balls in the air. And how do we get all of those moved in the right direction? So that is why my project plan is so long and complex. The things that I didn't expect, which is your actually to your question, the downsizing has been a big deal because of I am sort of minimalistic. I was in the military, so I got used to moving every few years and didn't get too attached to things. My husband, on the other hand, cried when he broke a hammer, so he has a very strong attachment to his things. And so getting through sort of that downsizing process of, a couple of decades worth of collecting of things has definitely been a learning journey for us to go on together. The feeling that I have about just reaching that place of, I get to make decisions not so much based on money anymore, but based on what I'm super passionate about, and learning to, embrace that creativity and follow that path has been just it's been surprising to me how different it feels to walk around in the world and in a place of not scarcity around money and instead a place of um, following where you feel like you can make the biggest impact during this lifetime. So those are a couple of the kind of the big surprises.
That is really good information to share with us. I know we were speaking on your show yesterday about Maslow's hierarchy of need and how we kind of check those boxes off. And it's very interesting that when you talk about making decisions from passions, things that you enjoy, this is a very similar conversation I have with retirees because that's kind of what we all want at the end of the day. So that
Yeah.
surprise is kind of a gift that you found there, and you're sharing with people that you may not have to wait to then if you're making some of these changes here. You also talked to us and you shared with us about the surprises of just how complex your situation is, right? That's you personally, but you've got people that are renting that it could be simple, but then you've got people with multiple businesses or different states that they've got properties in. So everybody's situation can be a little bit different. So I can see where having, a guide, somebody who's been there before you would be very beneficial to listeners who were thinking about this. We've only got a few minutes left here. So we're getting towards the end of the show. How do you see the tiny house movement evolving, and what financial trends do you predict in this space?
Yeah, so the tiny house movement has really picked up a lot of steam in popular culture, which has been great. Everybody's gotten really excited about it, and I feel like we're in this floodgate moment where there's just a really big buildup of people that would do it, but it still is just a little bit too hard, and it's a little bit too hard on the legalization front. That's like a whole show into itself, the complexity of the legalization. And it's a little too hard on the financial front from the standpoint that there aren't a lot of great lending paths out there. And so, as I work with the Tiny Home Industry Association and volunteer on the resource map. There's other organizations that are really focused on this legalization effort. There's an international committee that has been formed that's trying to work on consolidating and making more concise the building codes and acceptance of tiny homes. And if that were to happen, that would impact not only the legalization, but also the lending environment. And if those two gates started to peak open a little bit, I feel like there would just be a flood of people making this choice because there's, generations of folks out there that are thinking about, what their values are, what's more important to them, having a large home, which is what the builders primarily prefer to build due to profit margins. And that's what municipalities prefer due to tax base. So, but there are people that are really trying to make this choice, but it's just a little bit too hard. So I feel like that the future of this is really dependent upon those two things. And should it get easier, then you will see a lot more of this happening actually in your communities, instead of it just being something that maybe you're seeing on YouTube and HGTV.
I love it. I love it. Now, you mentioned if you're driving right now and you're listening to this, we're going to have this in the podcast notes, but you mentioned an organization called the Tiny House Association. Was that right? Did I capture that right?
It's the
Uh,
Tiny Home Industry Association, THIA, THIA, tinyhomeindustry.association.org. And there's a resource map on this website that I personally work on to keep the legislation updated, state by state, county by county, city by city. So as changes happen, they're reflected on the map. There's also a link to communities, tiny home communities, and tiny home builders. So trying to provide a very easy resource for people to access who are trying to make this choice and to figure out in their community or their target community where they'd like to be what they can and cannot do.
I love it. I love it. So we're going to put that on the podcast notes as well so people can find out more about that. Laura, as we're bumping towards the end of the show, what have I forgot to ask you that you'd like to share with listeners today?
So I think that listeners, um, there's a sort of conventional wisdom that we have all, come up with. And I think one of the biggest challenges that people face is just overcoming sort of the norm and choosing a different path. And I would say that people that go down this route have an independent sort of bent to them, and they're able to do things differently than other people. And one of the huge topics that comes up all the time is about home equity.
Mhm.
And so I write about this topic. I'm getting ready to record another podcast episode about this topic. And I think that there are some misconceptions that we have about home equity that I think are worth critically thinking about if that is a barrier to going down this path. And, the primary basis of that is that home equity, as long as you're in your home, is not something that you can just cash out. It comes with interest and fees. And so if we take that money that we otherwise would have been plowing into our home equity and maybe we put it somewhere else, is that a choice that would be as equally good for us in the long term? This is something to explore because we definitely have a little bit of sacredness that we aspire that we assign to home equity, and without kind of critically thinking about what home equity actually is going to do for us in the future. So
I
I love
love it.
this home equity topic.
We could have done a whole show on home equity there. Now I'm curious. So I will encourage listeners to do the same thing I'm going to do is to pop over to your podcast and listen to the rest of this when you do that. Now, for listeners who want to do that, how can they find you? How do they get to your podcast?
Yeah, so my podcast is linked from my website, thetinyhouseadvisor.com. Advisor is spelled ADVISER, not OR. The podcast is Less House, More Moolah. It's on all the platforms. Moolah is MOOLA. That home equity episode will be episode 40. So that is going to be coming out in a few weeks. And I write about this on LinkedIn too. I'm very active on LinkedIn.
Love it. Well, listeners, go out there and find Laura on LinkedIn. Laura, we're right here at the end of the half hour. Thank you so much for being on this show. Really enjoyed it. Have a good rest of the day there.
Thank you so much.